By the end of World War II, some 6 million Jews had been murdered by the Nazis and their partners. Indeed, from the very beginning, the Nazi Party wanted to rid Germany, Europe, and the whole world of the influence of the Jews, which they considered to be dangerous, and the Jews themselves. When the Nazis came into power in 1933, they began isolating the Jews, separating them out of society. They passed many laws against them, all of them in order to restrict them in the economy, to restrict them in the social life of Germany. Around the time the war broke out, they intensified their anti-Jewish activities as they got more territory under their control. In the summer of 1941, with the invasion of the Soviet Union, they began using mass and systematic murder against the Jews. This policy of murder eventually came to be known as the Final Solution, and it was carried out and continued to be their policy until the end of World War II. During the Holocaust, the majority of the Jews of Europe were murdered. Thousands of Jewish communities were destroyed. Jewish civilization had been destroyed. Jewish culture, Jewish religion, a Jewish way of life that really would no longer be. Indeed, an entire civilization that existed for some 2,000 years had come to an end.
Anti-Semitism is a concept that was coined in the 19th century, representing hatred of Jews either as individuals, a group, or a concept. But Jews have been blamed throughout history for all of humanity's shortfalls, for any natural disaster or any tragedy. Were the attitudes and actions against Jews in Nazi Germany a new phenomenon, or was it part of a continuum of anti-Semitism throughout history?
Throughout history, anti-Semitism has taken on different forms, but it's always affected by the time and place in which it occurs. Different cultures, beliefs, events shape anti-Semitism, but throughout history, there are also salient elements that always repeat themselves. For instance, Jews have been blamed for being in league with the devil. In the Middle Ages, they were blamed for the Black Death and for poisoning wells. In certain places, entire communities were burned to death, even when the Pope came out against those accusations. In blood libels against the Jews that began in the Middle Ages and continue even today, the demonic image of the Jew recurs, and the Jew is accused of using the blood of non-Jewish victims in Jewish religious rituals. Treason and treachery have been associated with the Jews throughout history, so that from the beginnings of Christianity, the Jews were blamed for betraying Jesus to the Romans, an accusation that was only officially retracted by the Catholic Church after the Holocaust. In a trial that took place in 19th century France, Alfred Dreyfus, a Jewish officer in the French army, was accused of espionage and betraying his homeland. Ultimately, he was found innocent, and all those allegations were proven to be lies. During the Weimar Republic, the Jews as a group were accused of being unpatriotic. Even worse, they were accused of stabbing Germany in the back and plotting to bring about her military defeat, even though 100,000 of them served as officers and soldiers in the German army, and 12,000 Jews were killed fighting for their country. In the 20th century, the Jews were accused of being a demonic force that poisoned the world with conflicting ideas such as exploitative capitalism and communism. There are many other examples of accusations that have been made against the Jews based on social, religious, or historical circumstances that repeat themselves. For instance, Jews are always accused of caring only about money. They're accused of conspiracy. And they're always accused of plotting to take over the world.
Throughout history, negative stereotypes were used against Jews. As educators, it's important to discuss the problematic issue of stereotypes. Why do people stereotype, and what is so dangerous about stereotyping? From an educational perspective, it's important to emphasize to our students that these ideas of anti-Semitism are obviously false, It's very important that they don't get the illusion that this is just another legitimate narrative of history.
Anti-Semitism has existed throughout history. If so, what did the Nazis add or change?
Hitler's book, Mein Kampf, is a chief platform for conveying Nazi ideology.
By defending myself against the Jew, I am fighting for the work of the Lord. With satanic joy in his face, the black-haired Jewish youth lurks in wait for the unsuspecting girl whom he defiles with his blood, thus stealing her from her people. With every means, he tries to destroy the racial foundations. For a racially pure people which is conscious of its blood can never be enslaved by the Jew. Culturally, he contaminates art, literature, the theater, makes a mockery of natural feeling, overthrows all concepts of beauty and sublimity, of the noble and the good.
The innovation is that in the core of Nazi ideology lays the idea of racism. This ideology saw the Jews as a demonic force, aiming to poison the world, to take control over the world. The Nazis defined Germany as a super race. They aimed to create a new world under their leadership based on race.
Since human beings were defined by their race, Jews were seen as evil just because of their genetic makeup. That was immutable. Nothing that they could do could change that. Therefore, according to Nazi ideology, the world had to be redeemed from the Jews. Discussing ideology is essential because ideology is a pattern of beliefs, a system of thoughts and actions, a way of organizing your goals and your targets that ultimately leads to action.
My classmates, who were my little friends, and we visited each other and played together and did our homework together, what have you, must have picked up new vibrations at home because suddenly they called us dirty Jew, they called us other names, they would not play with us, they would not invite us. Some of their parents would telephone my parents and say, I hope you understand, but if my son plays with your son and his other friends will, etc. They knew what was going on. They made excuses, but it didn't stop.
After discussing Nazi ideology and its roots, we move on to discussing the questions. How did this ideology become accepted by the public? How did this ideology evolve to become the force that led to the murder of 6 million Jews?
In 1934, there was a terrible paper being published. It was called Die Stürmerzeitung. That was a horrible paper. That affected me terribly because it was plastered on all these stores that sold newspapers. And in the morning, going to school, I would see this Stürmerzeitung and people standing and reading them. And what did they list in this Stürmerzeitung? They had people faces with long noses and saliva running from their mouth and looking at little Gentile children, greedily looking at the money that the children had in their hands, like they wanted to steal the money from these children. And they had terrible stories in there that Jewish doctors trying to inject Gentiles with poisonous medication. They had bankers that would swindle Jews out of their money. And here I was walking to school, and people were actually reading this, and young people, old people of all ages. And by the time I got to school, I couldn't learn.
Anti-Semitic discourse became common and legitimate in the media and culture and even in education. A perfect example of this is the book The Poisonous Mushroom, a book published in Germany for children, focusing on the corruption, the evilness of Jews. It was not coincidence that they chose the mushroom to depict the Jew. It's very hard to distinguish between a poisonous mushroom and an edible one. It's very hard to distinguish between a Jew and any other human being. It's very hard to control mushrooms. They spread all over the place without control, as with the Jews. A different example is another picture from this book. Almost illustrating what we read in Mein Kampf, we can see the Jew trying to tempt to seduce these two innocent little German kids. Another picture reminds us of the old and ancient roots of anti-Semitism that we're passing on from generation to generation. Yet another picture reminds us of the new ideas of Nazi ideology. New ideas that were based on race, on blood, on genetics, on biology. This picture describes a scene familiar to any German kid, because Nazi ideology and racism were ultimately part of the curriculum in every school.
Propaganda presented the Jew as the root of all evil and presented the Aryan as good, pure, and strong. It's important to understand that propaganda used messages that were both overt and covert. The messages were very powerful because they were based on familiar notions. People heard them again and again and again. They stopped questioning them, and the lies ultimately became facts.
The Nazis used different tools to pass on their propaganda. They used the media, they used newspapers, radio, and street demonstrations. The propaganda that was heard everywhere gave the illusion that everybody agreed with it.
Ultimately, anti-Semitism was the driving force behind the Nazi policies as expressed in legislation, in persecution, and in oppression, and the Holocaust could not have happened without it.
One would think that after the Holocaust, anti-Semitism would disappear. Unfortunately, that's not the case. Today, anti-Semitism is a constellation of new ideas and old ideas. The chief idea behind new anti-Semitism today is the demonic image of the State of Israel and Zionism. A study conducted between 2013 and 2014 by the Anti-Defamation League in over 100 countries around the world found that more than 1 in 4 adults, 26% of those surveyed, held anti-Semitic attitudes.
Anti-Semitism is the longest hatred. However, in today's society, there is hatred of other groups as well. This is the opportunity to discuss with our students the concepts of hate groups and scapegoating. What drives people to join these groups? What are the dangers of these social phenomena? We are used to thinking of ourselves as helpless in the face of aggressive group hostility and widespread hatred. We're used to saying, it's not our responsibility, and there's nothing that we can do about it. The story of Billings, Montana is an important and inspiring lesson. In 1993, Ku Klux Klan flyers were distributed. Gravestones were overturned in a Jewish cemetery. Swastikas were painted on the home of a Native American family. African American families were intimidated, and bricks were thrown through the windows of Jewish homes displaying the menorah for the Jewish holiday of Hanukkah. Rather than accept what was happening in their community, people decided to take a stand. Those who were not targets became allies of those who were. Officials made strong statements. The Painters Union painted over the graffiti. Community leaders sponsored human rights activities. The local newspaper printed full-page menorahs for display around the town, and most of the 10,000 people who displayed them were not Jewish. With anti-Semitism prevalent again today, it is important to highlight groups and individuals who act against it.